I've done a video on determining the bottleneck in X-Plane that was probably more complicated than it needed to be. So I want to give you a very simple one here. This is the frame rate indicator in X-Plane, and I'm going to use this zoom feature to make things bigger, but you can output the frame rate to the cockpit display. Now if you don't know how to do that, real quickly, if you go to your settings, and you go to data output, the very first choice is frame rate, and choose to show that in the cockpit display. Show in cockpit frame rate, right here, show in cockpit frame rate. And that's again under data output in the settings. So again, I'm going to be zooming in and out with this magnifying feature. And once we have that up here, we see our frame rate in the upper left-hand corner. And I want to go over real quickly what all this means. Over here is our frame time for the simulator. Here it shows that it takes 0.015 seconds to draw one frame. And that's how we derive our frame rate. And real quickly, we're going to look at our calculator and move this stuff out of the way. I'm going to plug in my calculator 0.015, and I'm going to hit the 1 over x feature to flip the the numerator and the denominator, and that gives us about 67 frames per second. And as you see, that matches, look, 67 frames per second. And I'm going quickly so you don't get bored. Here we have our CPU frame time. This is how long it takes to draw one frame for the CPU. And here's how long it takes to draw one frame for the GPU. And in simple terms, the bigger of these two numbers, that's your current bottleneck. Currently, the bottleneck is my CPU. It takes 0.014 seconds for a CPU frame draw and only 0.008 for the GPU. GPU is able to draw frames much more quickly because this is a lower number. And again, this is how long it takes to draw a frame. Now, as I said, it's currently the bottleneck. You can change the bottleneck by messing around with your graphics settings. If I go into the graphics settings now, and the stuff over here on the left tends to affect the GPU more than CPU. If I crank these all the way up, here, the anti-aliasing and the anisotropic filtering, I crank those all the way up, then that is going to place more load on my GPU, or in other words, graphics card. And that is going to shift the bottleneck to now the graphics card. So again, it's not a hard and fast rule in a system what the bottleneck is, because you can change the bottleneck by changing the graphics settings. So you have to find the graphics settings you want to run and then look at these numbers. So here you see now our frame time for the sim, is 0.02 basically. Our CPU takes 0.016 to draw a frame, and our GPU now takes 0.019. So now our GPU is the higher number, and the GPU is our bottleneck. And we can validate that by, I can pull up GPU-Z, which will show you the most accurate representation of what, it's a program, a free program you can download. Shows you an accurate representation of the GPU load, and you can see here, GPU load 99%. I don't think this ever shows 100. I think the highest number it ever shows is 99. And you can see on this graph, before I changed it, the GPU load was about 60%. And then this is where I made the change, and it jumped up to 100. And again, that's when you saw these number shifts. So in simple terms, to wrap this up, with your current graphics settings, whichever one of these numbers is the higher of the two is your bottleneck. And with the current graphics settings, the GPU is my bottleneck because this is the higher of the two numbers. It takes longer for the GPU to draw a frame than the CPU. And by the way, when you make changes to your graphics settings in X-Plane, you may need to restart the sim for some graphics changes, like if you change texture resolution. But for the changes I made, those can pretty much be done on the fly. So hopefully this helps you understand how to quickly and easily find the bottleneck in X-Plane 12.